And we are live.
Hello everyone. My name is Larry Richardson. I'm here today giving you a program I've worked on for some time. It's called Finding Nature's Canvas. Just a real brief little bit of information about myself. I'm a wildlife biologist and I'm also a photographer. So you might think that most of my images are about nature, and they are. But I do like shooting all kinds of photography. But you'll find this to be a nature-driven program. Finding Nature's Canvas. I guess I will start, and I have no idea how long this is going to go, but we're going to have fun doing it. I find myself for years looking at the philosophical aspects of being a photographic artist. It's quite different from being a painter. I could not paint my way out of a wet paper bag. And many years ago, I was in a small group of with a small group of photographers at a conference, and we were talking to Marty Hill, or Martha Hill. She's a former editor of Audubon magazine, and her training was in fine art, and she was talking about the differences between an artist who paints and an artist who photographs, saying that a painter comes to a scene with a blank canvas, and everything they paint they place onto that canvas, and of course in so doing they have strict control of their composition, their brights, their darks, their focus, their sharpness, and their blurriness. Whereas a photographer comes along, and our canvas is that which we look through in through our cameras. It's that viewfinder that we peek through, and that is our canvas. That's what we're looking at all the time. And the problem with that is that so often our images are cluttered because we have such a problem. And our main goal oftentimes is removing that clutter, removing those sticks or blades of grass, trying to get the animal just in the right position, making sure your background is just right, because we oftentimes don't have control of them. And that's one of the biggest challenges to being a photographer, particularly a nature photographer. And I'll have several disclaimers throughout this show, but my first one is this. The motivation for this show came from this quote. Jean Durst, a French ornithologist, he said that man has sufficient objective reasons to cling to the safekeeping of the wild world, but nature will only be saved, after all, by our hearts. And why this was such a motivation for me is because for years I might vote for a particular candidate, president, or maybe a commissioner that I knew supported certain environmental things that I liked. But I discovered, and I hope you will realize this too, that as much as I might know about any candidate out there or any particular thing that me as a member of the public might vote on, I end up always voting with my heart. But, and here's one of the reasons for doing this program, is to present science, but in such a way that science looks really good, using the science that comes from the palette or the canvas of a photographer, and presenting what I hope would be conceived as good art, but that feeds your brain, and therefore the decisions you make, still we make with our heart, you make with that knowledge of what is right and wrong with the environment, what we should vote and not vote for, that kind of thing. So Jean Durst, his quote means a lot to me. I've got one more disclaimer I got to show you, and that is no, drinking was not involved. I was in graduate school, and I had a Elmer, a pet alligator, and I realized years and years ago that you cannot teach an alligator to read. You can't do it. You just can't do it. And the reason for this setup here is because we as humans have to know that animals can't read. We're the ones that have the creative spirit, that creative ability. Yeah, you could argue that some animals can create certain things, use certain tools, but we're the ones that can totally destroy the place we live. And, you know, alligators can't do that. Wildlife cannot do that. They survive on instinct. And yes, we might know those instinctive characteristics of animals. We know some instinctive characteristics of humans, but we'll never get it right. We are completely unpredictable type of being. And so you have to understand where I'm coming from there, that when we talk about wildlife and nature, we are talking about animals that run on autopilot. And we have to give them some grace for that. The other thing I want to show you is this was 2004. This is my first digital cameras. I'm in a helicopter flying over Pine Island Sound, and I'm photographing a shark. And the reason for this is the day after Hurricane Charlie. And what I later learned that first week I was up at Sanibel Island, we were trying to open up the island as a complete disaster area. Not as bad as this last hurricane, but pretty bad. And I was told that the Mote Marine Lab had a research project going on where they actually had put sonar tags on a bunch of sharks so that they can track these sharks, obviously underwater, with a system they had set up in Pine Island Sound. As it turns out, Hurricane Charlie was not supposed to go over Sanibel and Captiva Islands, but in fact it did, and that wasn't actually known until about 2 hours prior to it doglegging and going right across the islands. And come to find out from the Marine Lab folks that the sharks left 24 hours prior to the hurricane getting there. 24 hours before Hurricane Charlie hit the island, these sharks had left Pine Island Sound. And so maybe destined to be a famous quote someday is, when you need to know the weather, ask a shark. And the reason I actually bring that up, is, and this is really important, is because we need to be paying particular attention to the things around us, the natural things around us, not just the vegetation, the flowers, the trees, and you know, when fall comes and when spring comes, that sort of thing, but the animals as well, because they tell us so much about what's going on in our environment. So keep that in mind. And my next disclaimer is really about endangered species. So many of the animals that I have the pleasure of shooting, and it's unfortunate that the state of Florida has the third highest number of endangered species in the nation, behind Hawaii and California. And it's one reason is because we have a lot of people here, a lot of things we've discovered too late, like what was happening to Florida panthers, what's happening to manatees. So again, over Pine Island Sound, I'm photographing these manatees. And you know, this is not that canvas that I want you to remember. This is not something you ever want to hang on your wall. Maybe this is, but the reason I'm showing this here is because, one, it's illegal to touch a manatee unless they approach you. If they approach you, you can hold your hand out, which this friend of mine, a fellow biologist, is doing, Joe Reinman. And this manatee sensed us. We were floating on top of the water, and he actually comes over and, you know, wants to shake hands or whatever, but actually turns over, and he actually wanted to be scratched because unfortunately there's so much water pollution in a lot of our waters. This is at Crystal River, that algae grows on these endangered species. Algae grows on manatees, and it makes them itch. And so it's not uncommon for them to come up and ask for a scratching. But the real premise here is the idea of endangered species. The irony among endangered species is they don't earn their title by running or flying or swimming or anything like that. Becoming endangered means that they've lost nearly everything that makes up their essential habitat, what they depend on to survive. They're awarded this prestigious status as a token of human apathy, arrogance, and ignorance. And I can't tell you how many times I've resembled all three of those, but we often do. They've become endangered because human hands have laid waste to their homes or killed them outright, which with manatees, you know, with boat encounters and prop encounters, you know about that if you live here. And, you know, we all live within, you know, an hour of the coastline somewhere in Florida. And so by definition, they're awarded such a prestigious title because of the imminent danger of extinction. And nearing such a glorious demise, saving them now requires that gentler touch, that hand going out to, you know, symbolizing the holding on of manatees to figure out what it takes for them to survive. And that is the reason for this canvas to look like this. I do have to get into a very little bit of sex, and only because I have to mix science in with this because that's what I do. And even though, again, this is not what I would call a picture you want to hang on your wall, there is a purpose for this picture. And, you know, we all have stories. And those stories that we get to tell about our images are oftentimes what really makes our images valuable. Well, so here's the story. This is a black skimmer colony. This is on Sand Dollar Island. And this male black skimmer shows up. He's got a fish in his beak, and I don't know if he's taunting her, but this is a courtship ritual where a male approaches a female. Hey, I've got a fish. If I give you the fish, can we grow a family together? And of course, what happens is that she takes the fish, he's holding it in her beak, and he is allowed to mate with her. And this is part of that mating ritual. He's literally standing on top of her. And at some point in time, which will never actually be shown on this computer, the mating is done and he hops off. And in fact, when I'm watching the whole thing, I couldn't actually see it happen. So I feel actually kind of good about that. I didn't want to be known as a wildlife voyeur. Nevertheless, he hops off, and then what does he do? I've done it. I've made it. We're mated. Okay, so now there is this family bond going on. She will lay 1 or 2 eggs, maybe 3 eggs, and on this beautiful hot beach during the hot spring and summertime, and will produce another group of skimmers. So, you know, I'm shooting these skimmers, and you know, typically you're seeing these birds fly by. Here is a skimmer that's got, I think it's a ballyhoo pinfish. I'm not sure what it is. I should look it up, and I apologize for that. But here's this adult male flying along. He's got a fish in his mouth, and he's either going to go to his mate, and it's already been established, or he's going to find himself a mate and pass off the fish and go through the whole mating sequence again. Well, and I saw this, and you know, you're trying to get these classic pictures. This is not one of them, but it's certainly diagnostic of what they do. And then I see this, and if you can't tell, that is a bleached clamshell, probably hundreds of years old, that a skimmer picked up on the beach, and it's flying around, passing over this colony of black skimmers. And I'm thinking, what is going on? And then I realize, and you have to look carefully, but right behind the head of this skimmer is that white patch on the back of the neck. That's very indicative of a juvenile. And in terms that you might find appropriate, perhaps an 18-year-old, you know, not really figuring out what's going on, going, well, they're all picking up stuff and flying around with it. I might as well pick up, oh, a clamshell. So maybe next year it figured it out and actually caught a fish and used it to mate. But this year, not so much. All right, so continuing with a science theme for a little bit longer. You've been to the beach. If you got a long lens, and it doesn't have to be that long, certainly with a pair of binoculars or a spotting scope, a lot of people enjoy looking at the birds, the shorebirds. And here are 3 birds. I'm seeing a black skimmer. On the left side, I'm seeing a royal tern, and also on the right side, a royal tern. And all 3 of these are banded. Now, there's always an aluminum U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service band that's got a particular unique number on it. But then oftentimes they'll have a different color band, and those bands are designed to show up high contrast white lettering on green, black lettering on orange. Anyway, band numbers that are designed to be able to be seen at some distance if you have the right kind of telephoto lens or scope. So I just wanted to show you, and this is what's amazing about our bird life and why, and I apologize in advance, well, not quite in advance, that so many of these pictures are going to be birds, but not all of them. Anyway, I often see these. You go to the beach and you just look around and look for these different colored bands. And if you can get that sequence right, if you can see a number and write that number down, you can send it to the U.S. Geological Service. They have a website. All you have to do is type in band returns or U.S. Geological Survey. You can find that website. You can send in the appropriate number of the band, the species of bird, where you saw it, you know, the UTM coordinates, latitude, longitude, and they will send back the information about that bird. And what's amazing, well, let me go back to this semi-palmated plover. This plover was born, when it was banded, it was banded as a nestling above the Arctic Circle 8 years ago. And they don't stay above the Arctic Circle over winter. Every year they have to migrate. So here's a semi-palmated plover that's made the flight all the way to Florida. Typically they gas up here, eat a lot of worms, things they find on the beach that are appropriate, and then they continue their way to South America, some as far, depending on the species, as far as Argentina. Imagine flying from above the Arctic Circle every year, 8 years in a row, from Arctic Circle all the way to Argentina and then back again. And it happens every year for most of our shorebirds. Most of them are migrants. Here's an oyster catcher, very easy to read. This is with a 600 millimeter lens, but a pair of binoculars could have picked up these numbers. And then again, another black skimmer here. And these birds live a tremendously long time, more than most people think. And so, you know, you kind of get a charge out of that. But what I'm really telling you this for is so that you'll understand that the wildlife you see, to me, is precious. I hope you'll think the same way, but also that they carry with them a history. How many years and how many miles have these birds flown back and forth? What have they seen that we could only wish we'd seen? Here's a group of pelicans. This is a more artistic view. This would be a canvas that I really enjoy looking at. It's an HDR image. That pelican in the middle is kind of saluting. But anyway, these are white pelicans, and they migrate from Canada and the extreme northern United States. And I shoot these pictures, and when I get home, I do take a close look at them. And here, and this one I've actually blown up almost to the point where it's just slightly pixelated, but you can read that band, and I think it's D033, and sent that band number in. And this was last year, December of 2021, south of Marco Island, that I shot this with a friend of mine. And we never got close enough to kick up the birds, which is very important not to do. And that band number we turned into USGS came back with born in North Dakota, northern North Dakota, in 2008. So we're talking 2021, we're talking 12, 13 years. 13-year-old band, 13-year-old bird, banded as a chick and has flown back and forth at least 13 times to South Florida. And I think that's amazing. I'm going through thousands and thousands of images, and I'm seeing bands that I never recognized years ago when I first took them. This is a peregrine falcon, fastest bird in the world. They are acceptors, which means these are birds that actually capture their prey in midair, which means they eat other birds. We found this bird perched in a tree, and I'm going to go to that in just a moment, but he was perched in a mangrove tree overlooking the very birds we were photographing, these white pelicans, plus all the shorebirds. And I think that the shorebirds take care in landing and hanging around the white pelicans. Pelicans are too big for a peregrine to go after, but the shorebirds can hang in there with them. It's a shallow mud flat. There's lots of food there for the shorebirds, and these are probably mostly dowitchers and sanderlings, but plenty of food for them to eat, and they're eating stuff that the pelicans don't eat, so they're not competing with each other. And we turn around because we're up against the mangroves, and here this peregrine comes in and perches. An adult peregrine, fastest over 200 miles an hour. They'll dive over 200 miles an hour. They are fast enough flyers that when they kick up these shorebirds, which is what they have to do, they kick up these shorebirds, they'll chase them down and actually grab them in midair. I've seen them grab a duck by the back, flying, and then landing with that duck and taking it apart. Well, you can't blame them for that's the way they collect their food. Fastest bird in the world, and also, excuse me, they're on the endangered species list. Let me get a drink of water. Maybe they're not. Are they on the endangered species list? If they should still be. I worked with them back in Utah in the early 80s, hacking them, taking chicks and raising them, and amazing, amazing birds. So I'm going to change just a little bit and start showing you more pictures that I've tweaked. And because we're talking ultimately about presenting images that I would like to frame someday, or at least throwing them up to the people that watch this video to see the difference in some of these images. I really like the picture of the peregrine sitting in the tree. All I've done is tweak the colors just a little bit. I've toned the background down just a little bit, nice and sharp, but then using topaz, and I like certain aspects of the various topaz software that you can purchase, but one of them you can actually take one of the software packages, you can actually take your images and convert them to paintings. Now, I do think this is sort of cheating because it's like you don't have to do much to it to get at least this particular form of photograph, which is designed to look like a painting. But I'm sure there are artists in the world that I'm insulting by showing this picture. But I just, you know, a lot of my friends, they actually like the original photograph better. But if you're an interior designer, maybe you would choose this kind of photograph. Again, back to the skimmers, watching them, you know, here's a photograph of a parent, an adult coming in and passing off a ballyhoo to its chick. The chick's probably 2 or 3 weeks old. You know, okay, it's actually not something I would want to frame, mainly because of the composition. But I just was intrigued when I decided I would just tweak it in topaz and turn it into a painting. The eyeball on the fish came out really well, and you have this squawking, basically mouth open young looking at its parent. And I like the design aspect. This is looks like a painting. I don't have a lot of these. This way, there are other things you can do in topaz. Some things I like a lot more when I do take a photograph and tweak it a little bit. You know, it's kind of like going into Photoshop and just going crazy with colors. One of my most favorite images is the reddish egret, and our producer Jim Robillard, he and I were at Sandar Island last August, and I shot this reddish egret. I love to watch reddish egrets. Again, I've always loved watching animal behavior, but you pay attention to reddish egrets, and they're known for their dancing. Maybe some people call it a ballet, but there's a purpose to it. This one is actually circling in very shallow water, maybe 4 or 5 inches. I'm actually standing in the water, and it's making a circle of bubbles, and it actually directs the fish. And so the fish start swimming in a certain direction, and it'll be behind these fish, and the fish start jumping out of the water, and it'll start grabbing fish. And this routine ballet is just wonderful to watch. And of course, their wings are up, casting shadows, perhaps. I love the detail in this image, but I really like this picture. And again, using topaz, but all I did was slightly increase the saturation, maybe more than slightly, but also the detail, the color underneath the wings, which is a reflection of the water that they're flying, that they're prancing over. And I just love the bright colors. And maybe I'm starting to go colorblind in my old age, but I tend to like rich colors most of the time. This next picture, again, near the coastline, is one of a bobcat. And I'm walking down a trail, and this bobcat comes out, looks at me, and sits down. And I have my camera with a 400 millimeter on it, so I'm not very close. And I pick it up, put it the viewfinder to my eye, and I shoot off a couple pictures, and it runs away. I thought, well, this is nice. I think it's a nice picture. I like the composition. It's not really a target. It kind of gives you a sense of place. You know, in a little way, but there's also something biologically wrong with this. And no, it wasn't a trained bobcat. It was a very wild bobcat, and I must have just caught it at the right moment. But you know, bobcats, like other wildcats, at least in the United States, are known for their stealthiness, their secretive behavior. They tend to blend a bit more than blend into the surroundings, and perhaps like they're intended to. They're spotted cats, and if you've done any behavior work and read any of the research that's been done on cryptic coloration, spotted cats are harder to see. I can see this one really well. But then I thought, I'm going to convert that to a black and white. It's actually sepia. So I get this brown cast, but I took away all that rich green coloration because I wanted the cat to blend just a little bit more with its surroundings. Is this that canvas that people want to see? Well, I'm not telling you it is or not, but I want to show you some ideas and what it means to see these images and why I did this. This cat should blend a little bit more into its surroundings. It's not necessarily needs to be that way. But in contrast to the bobcat, I was near the coastline, and here comes this double-crested cormorant. Didn't care about me one way or the other. Lands probably 15, 20 feet in front of me, and I shoot this picture. This is full frame. Just happy to be near me, I guess. Beautiful teal green eyes, beautiful orange flesh around the beak and face. Gorgeous. And I get this back to my computer. It's a strictly Lightroom image. You know, I tweak most of my stuff in Lightroom. I only go to Photoshop when I really want to screw things up, and I do so well. So I'm looking at this and going, well, I want it to pop off the screen a bit more. And so what I did is I brought this in, and all I did was I darkened the background a little bit. Well, actually, I didn't. I just enhanced the colors. I didn't select the bird at all. I didn't just darken the background. I darkened the whole thing, but and then added a lot more detail. Just a couple sliders, and, enhanced the saturation and brought up the detail to really bring that feather detail out. But and actually, I think it made the contrast, unlike the bobcat image with that green background. Here, this one, I wanted to jump off the page. I didn't want it to be stealthy. So that is the reason for this one. One of my favorite pictures that I get comments on is rather simple one. Any sunset will work, but when you have shorebirds flying in, this is at Ding Darling. You can get this about any afternoon when the sun's going down on the Wildlife Drive. And again, shorebirds, I have no idea which kind they are, but they're all flying in. You're underexposing that image by at least 2 stops, maybe 3 stops. And specular highlights coming off the water. That's why you got that white. And but it's beautiful orange sunset reflecting off the water. And I tweaked this just a little bit. Again, it's not for me, but it might be for those interior designers who are putting images into some place where they need just a little bit more color. And the only two colors I added were blue and green. Otherwise, it's virtually the same, a little bit more black here, but a little bit more or less the same image, just slightly tweaked. You know, you pick and choose. Most of the time when well, virtually all the time, when I'm sending images out to my friends to comment on which one they like best, almost all the comments that come back are, I like the original better. Well, I'm also sending those images out to my fellow photographers, and, you know, we're purists. So this one's going to be different in that this is not a good picture. I'm drinking water. Great blue heron down just a little ways from Lake Ingram in Everglades National Park. A beautiful, beautiful place to go, unless it's really hot. And here the sun is literally straight up in the sky. It's like noon, 1 o'clock, and there's not a cloud in the sky. Not a great time to be shooting, but I kept this image, and here's why. There are actually some fishing lures in this shot, and I won't point them out to you, but they're there. Otherwise, you know, I've toned it down. I underexposed it when I actually shot it so that it's the white parts of the head aren't too blown out. And also it's after Hurricane Charlie, after Ian, no, it's before Ian, Wilma and Irma. So it's you're looking at mangroves that have been severely damaged by hurricanes. It's not a good picture. But what's wrong with the picture? Well, first of all, the lighting, also the cacophony of stuff behind the bird, all those roots, you know, and the color, when you think about it, there's not a lot of colors here, but check this out. Well, and there's a fix here too. This is not a regular great blue heron. And in Sibley's book of birds of the United States, a Wuderman's heron, which is an intermediate phase of a great blue, so these two guys are really closely related. They're both great blue herons. The Wuderman's heron is this intermediate phase, or almost totally white phase. And so I cheated a little bit, but I shot this during the rain. I shot it, it was raining. But look at what I did to it. All I did was, well, I didn't do anything, except I lightened the bird up just a little bit. And look at the colors. Not a lot of colors in the background. The background does not compete at all with that bird. Great day. A friend of mine and I just got back from Colombia. Our guide, we were shooting birds for 10 days, and our guide was telling us how the shooting's better with you know, shooting in the cloud forest when there's no visible sun. And he was right. Colors are saturated, beautiful. You know, if you're not afraid of getting your camera wet, try it out. But to me, unlike the picture on the left, the picture on the right is that kind of canvas we ought to all seek. And as you're looking for these canvases, you know, views on which to place a bird or just a landscape, whatever, what is it you're looking for? And I've come to find I have so many images, and why not experiment and look for the character of nature? You know, find those particular images that define how unique our wildlife is, or how unique our environment is. And on the left, a reddish egret, and on the right, a great egret. And before this program, obviously, because I can't remember stuff like this, I looked up how many vertebrae a great blue heron has. 20. 20 cervical vertebrae, that's neck vertebrae, 20 cervical vertebrae in the neck of a heron. I'm assuming about that many in an egret, seeing how they should be cousins. But how many do we have, cervical vertebrae? 7. We have 7. So it's not necessarily a surprise that when they're preening, they could get themselves in a knot. Well, the bird on the left, the reddish egret, is actually turning its head way past 365 degrees. I can't turn my head 90 degrees. I can't look completely to my side. Maybe I need a chiropractor. And at least 450 degrees for the great egret. 450 degrees. That is a twist. And to see this, and understand what's going on, to understand the mobility and the grace and the beauty that these animals have, is one reason why finding nature's canvas is just a wonderful endeavor for all of us to take. And what about certain behaviors? Find a bird talking and photograph that speech. Kind of hard to do, you know, unless you have a video camera, but you can. When their mouth is open and they're saying something, well, this one's coming into a landing to nest with its mate. They already have a nest. And, you know, a beautiful wood stork, endangered species, gee, imagine that. Iridescent dark feathers, and just coming in for a landing. And I don't know what it's saying, but everybody, including us photographers, were paying attention. How about beautiful pink roseate spoonbills? Well, the reason they're beautiful is because they bathe, and they bathe a lot. Down at Lake Ingram, the mud flats down there were tremendous, and you don't want to step off your boat on the mud flat. You'll probably go 2 or 3 feet into the mud. Even these birds are sinking. And as birds are feeding in groups, they flap in their wings, they're jumping up and down, and they actually splatter each other with mud. And periodically, these birds have to, is there any other word for it? They have to bathe. And when a roseate spoonbill bathes, they go at it all the way. And this one I shot at either 2,500th of a second or 3,200th of a second. One to freeze the water droplets. And then how about finding symbolism in our images? Maybe, you know, selfish character. I just got to turn away from my kids. They're driving me crazy. I've been there, and I know how they feel. I just can't bring my claws up to scratch behind my ears. So, you know, bald eagles, our nation's symbol, catch them in a pose that makes it memorable. And that's what Finding Nature's Canvas is all about, placing images on a canvas that we remember. And that's all about what photography is. Also, define the grace of some of the birds that we have around us. That beauty. This is an actual advertising great egret, and beautiful contrast in this white feather detail, orange beak, the green lores, that area just below the eye, beautiful green coloration there. But the contrast you can find looking at that bird with its surroundings. And I just heard from a friend of mine not very long ago that he was on a workshop and his teacher, who we're going to probably see at F3C, says, pay attention to your background. Pay attention to your background. And I should say it here, we all should be saying, pay attention to your background. Why? Because it makes your foreground pop. A little bit more science, and perhaps you'll understand the comic here, but this is a wintering black-bellied plover. This is a black-bellied plover that probably, like the semi-palmated plover, came down from north of the Arctic Circle and during the wintertime, and he's gassing up. What he is doing, yeah, my microphone is chirping at me because it needs a battery, but we're going to keep going. Actually, his battery's okay. Never mind. I'm sorry. So here's a black-bellied plover that, as the waves, the really slow-moving waves, come up on the beach and recede, immediately that plover sees a little air bubble popping up out of the sand. He knows there's a worm underneath it, and so what does that plover do? He drives his face into that sand all the way up to his eyeballs, and he is able to grab that worm and pull it up. And then what does he do? Yeah, by the way, those worms stretch out to be about 8 inches long. But then when he takes it over to the water and washes it off, washes the sand out of its mouth. All right, I'm going to change microphones. I'm going to take this one off. Sorry about that. You know, you plan for with our turtle people, and I have to give yet another disclaimer here, and that disclaimer is simply this, that you can't do this. It is illegal by Florida state statute to use a flash to photograph a sea turtle. Now, you can photograph sea turtles all you want, but you fire that flash, chances are you're breaking the law. I was actually working with a team of biologists. We were catching loggerheads and green sea turtles as they come up on the beach, protecting their eggs, and I was allowed to do this because I was documenting some things. All my turtle images go to conservation. It's important for you to know you just can't run out to the beach some night, find a sea turtle that silently crawls up on the beach, and use a flash. They've done research on this and found that when they're nesting, using a flash will alter how they cover up their eggs, and they don't do as good a job, and you could be endangering these already listed species. So that said, we're actually, and again, this is background for my images, my canvas images, and we spend several hours literally epoxying, gluing a satellite tag, a battery-operated transmitter to the back of a sea turtle onto the carapace. You sand down the carapace a little bit, make it a little bit rough. Of course, it doesn't hurt them. They never said anything to us. And you literally glue it on, and it takes hours. And then we actually paint on the anti-fouling paint so that the barnacles don't get so bad. And they last about a year, and then they fall off. So
that wasn't the problem.
Ah. Sorry, another microphone. Okay, so back on turtles. So anyway, finally, what we do is we release the turtle back in the water, and everything is good, you hope. Well, what I noticed, and what you need to be completely aware of, is that around the thin, fleshy areas of a sea turtle, especially around the eyes, around the neck, you will find just hundreds, and I mean hundreds, of mosquitoes. They're getting that one blood meal so they can reproduce again. Well, just so you know, you're spending a considerable amount of time working on this turtle. Your pants are stretched tight against your legs, and mosquitoes have a way of biting through your pants. This is my inner thigh and the top of my thigh. About 100 mosquito bites there. And that's just in one night. So mosquitoes can be kind of rough. But I got to say the rewards are fantastic. Another drink of water. And so here's something about your photography. I can't stress this enough, that so many I'm losing my voice. So many famous photographers will tell you that it takes that creative mind, that creative spirit, and oftentimes the photographs they take, they've already taken in their minds. And this is one of those where I've always wanted to get a sea turtle at night with celestial bodies, a moon, maybe a lightning, that kind of thing. And so finally I did, and here I planned for this. You got to make a plan. When you're going out to work on sea turtles one night and you have this opportunity that comes up, you've got an hour or two or three to plan for it, because that's how long it takes to work up these turtles. Glue that transmitter to the back, and as they walk away, you set your tripod down, lock your shutter open, and so it's open for a period of time, and I pull out a flash that's in my pocket. I know that I should be like 10 or so feet away, and I literally flash that turtle. Otherwise, it's pretty dark out there. Well, that's what I did here, except that I did not account for the full moon. And so as this turtle crawls, about every 10 feet it pauses. Well, it got to the edge of the Gulf of Mexico and stopped. And so what I got was a double exposure, an exposure illuminated by my flash and an exposure illuminated by the sun, or I'm sorry, by the moon, which is that silhouette in the distance. So kind of interesting. One of my most favorite pictures, and again, 20 years before I ever got it, is one that I dreamed about taking years before. And you have to understand the biology of any of our sea turtles. We have 7 sea turtles in the world, and every one of them is on the endangered species list. It tells you something about how, one, we're treating the oceans, and how and what we've done to sea turtles themselves, not to mention our fisheries. And here these sea turtles will come up on the beach silently, and only females, 2 to 3 decades after they were born, and chances are hatched off that very same beach, come back 2 to 3 decades later to nest for the first time, and then may nest every year, every other year for the next 20, 30, 40 years. They're long-lived animals. And the only witness that they have is the heavens as they crawl back in. Well, that's what I was trying to capture here, is this sea turtle all alone, silently, going back into the Gulf of Mexico with the stars ablaze, the Milky Way. And wonderful animals. You see these because you need to see them. It's not that we need to save sea turtles or any other endangered species. It's the fact that we need to save them because what we use to save them are the same things we'll employ to save ourselves when the time comes. Endangered species help us practice saving ourselves. And, you know, I brought it up already, but to understand this, that endangered species are sensitive indicators of how we are treating the planet, and we should be listening very carefully to their message. And it's very true. It'll always be that way. We need to be watching our environment, including those critters that live in it, and watching them closely, and sometimes following their leads. And who doesn't watch a woolly bug or caterpillar and think that something's going to happen to our weather? Or who doesn't watch an early spring? And what about the groundhogs, huh? Don't they come up and see their shadow? Well, they do tell us something about the environment we live in. In this program, I only have one flower I'm going to talk about, and that's the ghost orchid. It's now being considered for listing. Imagine that. It doesn't grow but in Collier County in South Florida, and maybe Monroe County, and in Cuba. I've actually done some research on ghost orchids in Cuba as well. A really cool flower, very particular, and you know, along our coastal zones and in our swamps along our coast, we've got that water that is absolutely essential. In Cuba, there's no water that lives underneath the ghost orchids that grow on the trees there. Why? Because it never freezes in Cuba. But in South Florida, rarely, but it does freeze here once in a while. And if our swamps dried up in the wintertime and we had one freeze, one good freeze like we had in 1989, without the water in the swamps that produces heat during the night, that keeps these guys warm enough so they don't freeze. Because it takes 10 to 20 years for a ghost orchid wild, growing in the wild, to produce its first flower. 10 to 20 years. And I have, on the Panther Refuge where we've surveyed ghost orchids for years, there's a tree that I know of that has a ghost orchid growing in it, and the ghost orchid is over 60 years old. 60 years old. Will probably live as long as that tree lives, as long as there's water in the swamp that tree is growing out of. Ghost orchids are fascinating. We've grown them. We've learned how to grow them in the lab, but they're still in trouble. And hold on. You have to understand the beauty of flowers is more than just the flower itself. Plants give us oxygen for the lungs and for the soul. And it's true. Who doesn't like a bouquet of flowers? Even I do. So ghost orchids are truly one of our most beautiful flowers. Rare, so when you see one, take notice and remember it. And if you can, take a picture. You know, as a wildlife biologist and a nature photography, both an occupation and an avocation. They are inseparable. Imagine, you're on this beach and the tide's coming in and out, and of course you have this thousands and thousands of these small crabs going in and out with the tide, feeding as new food is brought up and down the beach with the water, the wave action. And you happen to look down and there it is. You go, what is that? Well, that's actually a Florida panther track. We actually had a radio-collared cat swim out to one of the islands off the coast of South Florida and spend several months probably eating hogs and deer, maybe a coyote on this island, which we knew had those three species. And then after a while, its collar actually failed. We don't know what happened to that. But imagine you can find panthers virtually anywhere. And it's important to understand that, panthers as a large male, one of the largest males we have in North America, but probably the most endangered large male. Large cat. We're talking cats here that we have. It's very important, like other wildlife, that we watch them. If these guys blink out, it's because we have taken the very home that they depend on, and we don't want to do that. So I love reading. Edward Abbey produced a book years ago, The Journey Home, and he said that any scientist worth listening to must be something of a poet, must possess the ability to communicate to the rest of us his sense of love and wonder at what his work discovers. Well, you could take scientists and replace it with photography, with a photographer, because that's what we all try to do. If you're a nature photographer, you're trying to communicate your sense of love, what your work has discovered. And it's a wonderful occupation. It's a wonderful thing to do. And it's why we strive to put our images on canvas. White-tailed deer are abundant. I want to show you this because I found this quote years ago, and I'm a quote nut. In all things of nature, there is something of the marvelous. Aristotle, 200 years before the birth of Christ, supposedly is quoted saying this. Even back then, somebody knew how marvelous nature is. And the reason I like this quote and so many others is they've lasted the test of time, that they're truth back then and they're still true today. And, good quotes, timely quotes that have never strayed from being the truth are important for us to remember because they remind us of how important things are, particularly nature. Now, I was talking about the character of wildlife, but what about animal behavior? How do birds recognize themselves? I got in trouble years ago. Kind of got yelled at by one of my professors in grad school who accused me of being anthropomorphic. I was describing two fawn deer, white-tailed deer, playing, and you cannot say that. You cannot say deer play. That is anthropomorphic. That is using human terms to describe wildlife. And apparently in the science world, and I should believe this, but I don't, is you can't be anthropomorphic. And I learned the hard way. Can we see love or affection or play or jealousy in the images that we take? Well, technically they have no choice. But what you can, and you can still describe those because somebody's going to say, well, I know the science, but I believe in my heart that they're playing or they're in love, or that's maternal behavior that shows how wonderful they think their young offspring are. Well, they are probably imprinting, scientifically speaking, imprinting on each other. That young has to be able to identify the parent, and how do they do that when all the birds look the same, but also how that parent would identify day after day its young. Because if that doesn't happen, their young can be basically pecked to death by another bird. So keep in mind that we do use those anthropomorphic terms when we describe things, but look at things you shoot and look at that character that defines, maternal behavior, dedication, and call it love or call it imprinting, call it whatever you want. but use your heart when you do it. So a good friend of mine years ago, Daryl Galeen, he's out of Washington State, and he showed me a photograph that was printed in a really prestigious day planner. This calendar produced by Bill Janes. Some of you might know Bill Janes. But anyway, Daryl and Bill. So Daryl is showing me this beautiful picture of a tree during the wintertime, no leaves on the tree with this beautiful sky. Anyway, not remembering all the details, I do remember how gorgeous this picture was of this tree. And then he turned that tree, that picture, upside down, and what he revealed is a reflection of a tree in a puddle in a parking lot, asphalt parking lot. And from then on, I've always thought we need to be really paying attention to what we're looking at. And one day I was down at this particular place, and here is a little green heron, and the picture of the heron itself wasn't that exciting, but the reflection of that heron in the water is what I shot, and that's the picture on the right. And then I flipped it over, and you're looking at the picture on the left, which is actually upside down. And oftentimes we're told to turn our pictures upside down in a way to get a different perspective as to composition. This is a way to get a different perspective. Anyway, think about shooting upside down. Well, and I'm almost towards the end of my program. I got another hour. Back in the film days, I used to use Fuji Velvia, a high saturated film. I loved it. It really brought colors out. I like a lot of colors. And I got this slide back, a 2-hour exposure I made of the stars out in the middle of nowhere. And I realized, certainly, high saturated film, lots of color, but for the first time I realized how many colors the stars exhibit in the sky. But then I also thought, oh no, something's wrong with the emulsion. And I thought, that's kind of weird. None of the other pictures are screwed up. And I'm looking at this, and then I realized the emulsion's not peeling away. Those little yellow ticks in the image, that's lightning bugs. I didn't realize the lightning bugs were out that plentiful that night. And so it taught me a new way to consider seeing. And I found this quote by Marcel Proust: "The voyage of discovery is not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes." And so often, and I mean, I could shoot in Florida, I can shoot in the United States. I never have to go to Africa again. I never have to go to South America again. I can spend all my time here just learning to see differently and bring a whole new portfolio of images back from wherever I'm shooting because I've learned to see differently. We, as photographers, to fill that canvas, need to be thinking about shooting with different eyes, and it's important. Another person I met years ago, Mark Munch. Mark's father was a famous landscape photographer, primary photographer, I think, for Arizona Highways, a really great magazine. My parents took the magazine when I was raised in California. My dad loved what Munch did with his landscape photos about Arizona. And so Mark grows up under his father's wing, I suppose, and became a landscape photographer. But Mark's bent is that he puts people in his landscapes. And I realize as I'm looking through images that I think are important, they have people in them. And people are important because we are part of the environment. We will always be part of the environment. And that's a good thing. Now, sure, you can turn your camera one way or another and get rid of the people, but there are times when people actually define the environment that we are in. This is one of my most favorite ones. A couple of my interns were actually looking for ghost orchids, and the guy the student from Illinois College that's in the water, he's almost up to his chest in water. There are alligators in the pond, but we've got them trained not to eat students because they don't have any insurance, for one. But think about these two men one in the water, and one that climbed up very easily up into this huge cypress tree. Cypress tree is probably 300, 400, 500 years old. And think about this. If they weren't there, what would that habitat look like? Would you be able to make heads and tails of that habitat? Would you be able to understand what's really going on? How deep is that water? Are there orchids there? I see a lot of ferns. But is that tree even there? But when you see these two guys there, they actually give you a perspective that you would not otherwise have. I just love that picture. Another one that I really like, a friend of mine actually fishing on the Gulf Coast, and just this incredible bright orange sunset, and he's just hooked him a snook with his fly rod and used a barbless hook, catch and release, but just, you know, the perfect setting to see this environment and to see somebody having what I would consider, well, I don't know what I like better, fishing or photography. So, but my most favorite picture of all is this one. I said before, you cannot use a flash to photograph a sea turtle, but in daylight hours, you can shoot without a flash all you want. And I was actually working as a consultant. I was monitoring sea turtle nests that were hatching during a dredging project on the Gulf Coast. And I usually get to my station at 8 o'clock at night or in the evening. And I got there a little bit early because I wanted to watch the sunset like hundreds of other people at this particular park. And I drive up to the first nest, and immediately I see that it's going to hatch. And I look down, and you can see the little loggerhead sea turtle heads just starting to poke out. And I made the comment basically to myself, this nest is going to hatch. And a lady heard me. And it's like I advertised to the entire world. And about then, about the time I grabbed my camera, which I carried with me, all these people gathered. I didn't tell them to form two lines or anything, and these turtles started coming out of the sand and crawling, and the turtles knew just where to go. All the people knew just where to stand. Everybody has an iPhone or a cell phone, and it was just amazing. And the reason I really want you to understand this picture is because of all these people here, I dare that one in the future would ever see another hatching sea turtle nest. To hatch during the day is very rare. To be on a beach where they actually nest is incredibly rare. And these people saw something that probably will never see again. But they got to be witnesses. And by this program, I want you to understand that everybody that takes a picture, everyone that tries to put a picture on a canvas is a witness. And that image you put on that canvas is a witness to where you were and the story that you can tell. And that's incredibly important. Well, as I wind down, I do take landscape pictures. And in Florida, there's clouds. If there are no clouds, a lot of landscapes just kind of stink. Whereas you could be out west and you can have a beautiful mountain view and not a cloud in the sky and very respectable imagery. But in Florida, landscapes, I find that I really, really like my clouds. And clouds can do awesome things when you're around the coastline. And they're phenomenal. Long exposures taken as those clouds move can produce really great effects. Black and white, where you increase that texture and that detail in those images, really brings out some beautiful imagery. Clouds, I like shooting into the sun. That seems kind of crazy, but I love sunlight shots. I'm sorry, I misspoke. I love shooting into the sun. Anyway, a lot of HDR images, high dynamic range images. This is actually a couple days after the hurricane, and there's still debris washing up on the shore. Whose front yard it came out of, who knows. This is about a week after Hurricane Ian down on one of the islands on the Gulf Coast, and the pin shells. These are all empty pin shells that probably were in 8 or 10 feet of water prior to the hurricane. Empty, you know, these are just plain empty shells. The animals are gone, but they get washed up on the beach. just phenomenal how many were there. You don't want to be in bare feet. The pin shells are rather sharp. And in this way, too, the power of that hurricane is something else. And of course, the power of the sun, the power of the clouds, and water. You mix them all together, amazing. And rays of light, especially in black and white, those rays of light just it's phenomenal to me. And yeah, I like shooting birds, as you can tell, but I love images like these. But my favorite images are those of that light in the sky we call lightning. This is also on the Gulf Coast, on a beach, 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. And a storm is coming. I'm thinking I'm going to have to run for the vehicle, but I didn't, and I didn't need to. Great thing about lightning is it usually gives you fair warning that you're too close most of the time. You never want to be too close. And my disclaimer here is don't be stupid. Get away from lightning. If you can hear it, 10 seconds after, you're probably, after the flash, you're probably too close. But here these clouds are moving in. I'm taking a minute-long image, so the clouds are moving in, they give you that streak. And of course, on the right, I have that lightning. Another one, a full moon, and the moonlight is just peeking in the top of the image. And just one of those times, there's probably 3 or 4 flashes here, but with only one ground strike. So the clouds were illuminated by prior cloud-to-cloud strikes, cloud-to-cloud lightning, and then that one downstrike. And one of my favorite, this one again is on a beach. When the turtles are nesting, they're pretty much in a trance. They're very still. And I took this photograph of a lightning storm way south of where my position is. You can see those clouds. The orange in those clouds is caused by the urban glow in that town down there. And I illuminated the turtle with my flashlight. Took about 5 seconds of illumination. So there you go. Lightning, it's wonderful. I mean, don't get hurt. I didn't tell you to do it. And to get lightning and the stars, to me, is phenomenal. Most of my shots are 30 seconds to a minute long. So depending on the lens, I do get some streaky stars. They're not quite those bright dots in the sky. But frameable. I love lightning. And the images I've sold the most are these done on canvas, especially this one, and then probably my most favorite one. So I've taken you quite a ways, all around, a lot of birds, a lot of animal behavior, a lot of scenes, some landscapes. I'm talking about finding nature on your canvas. And it's important that as we go out and shoot images that keep in mind a new way of seeing and a way to display your images. It doesn't necessarily have to be on a canvas, but the whole idea of this whole program, if I haven't said it already, is make your images memorable, make your images worth looking at, spending time with. And that's what it's all about. So I have to put in a shameless plug here, and I want to take you to our next event in March, and that is the Florida Camera Club Council's 2023 Photographic Conference. It's going to be at Florida Gulf Coast University, March 10th and 11th. It's a 2-day, it is impressive, 2-day photographic experience. You can go to f3c.org for more information and to sign up. And if you do sign up, I will be there, and I am going to be the first keynote address on Friday the 10th. Communicate your passion will be what I will be talking about, and it's important that you understand that your camera equipment is not that big of a deal. Communicate your passion is about you. It's less about photography. It's more about the way you think, to share your art, to excite people with your vision, to tell your story. That's communicating your passion. You could do it with mediocre images, but it's better that you do it with really good images, and I hope you'll agree mine are okay. Otherwise, you're just showing millions of people mediocrity, which is the new normal. Communicating your passion is about change, changing your life to the better, and enriching the lives of others that can enjoy the photography the way you present it. I'd like you to come and hear my story. Make it yours. The Florida Camera Club Council's annual conference is on March 10th and 11th. And what else can I say but come? And I have another shameless plug here.
Join Larry Richardson and me, Jim Robillard, for a fun-filled evening at the Naples Pier for 2 creative sessions, Shooting into the Sun and Creative Night Photography and Light Painting, Friday, March 10th, as part of the F3C Photography Conference. In our first session, starting at 4 p.m., we'll cover the basics of shooting into the sun. We'll show you how to create beach portraits using off-camera flash to balance the beautiful ambient light of a sunset while softly lighting up your portrait subjects. Sunset is also a time for panoramas and time-lapses of the sunset. Movie mode time-lapse on today's modern cameras is an easy way to capture motion and beauty at sunset, while a panorama at the pier can incorporate foreground, middle ground, and the stunning skies we see here in Florida. We'll also cover long exposure photography to create dreamy, tranquil photos, smoothing out the water and waves with neutral density filters. So sign up and join us for fun at the beach. But there's more. After sunset, Larry and I will demonstrate a number of creative light painting tools. While we can't paint the pier as in years past, we will introduce you to the tools and techniques of light painting for both creative abstracts and stunning backgrounds for portraits in the night. So sign up now for both sessions at one great location. Join us Friday night, March 10th. Register now at www.f3c-conference.com. We'll see you there.
Well, that's all I have, but I want to just thank you for showing up, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation. Leave any comments below. I think we can do that, and hopefully we'll see you again. And just leave you with this: celebrate the canvas. Thanks.